No, right?
Are there a lot of hidden passageways like that they don't like barricade off? Because I know colonial houses like back then had a lot of those.
Not that I've been told. I mean, everything that is out, I mean, there's nothing hidden as far as I know, as far as I'm told. And the park rangers haven't told me about any hidden passages. One thing people normally ask me is, why are the steps off on the far side? If you notice, we came up sort of the end of the house, and the steps actually ran by a window. They did not, back then, they didn't want, wasn't the style to have a big main stairway in the middle of the house. Also, it would have broken up the look of those big entrance halls. And they had no compulsion about putting a stairway in front of a window. They wanted the window, they wanted the symmetry from the outside, and if the inside you covered a window up, so be it. So we're now in the kitchen wing, 3,000 square feet between up and down. Mrs. Ford had 5 servants. Don't know if any of those might have been slaves. I've not heard. There's no record of it. But she had 5 servants, a cook and 4 of the people who helped run the house. So they would have been very comfortable in these 2 rooms. If you weren't working, serving, and in the main house, you stayed in what I call the kitchen wing. So 5 people could be very comfortable upstairs and down. But remember, I said Washington brought 18 servants. 18 plus 5, plus whatever servants came with the aide-de-camps, whatever servants might have come with some of the other generals. So this area, I'm sure, got very crowded. Also, you'll notice there's only room, even in the best of times, to sleep six people in the beds, 5 people. We're certain that there was a pecking order. Depending on your station, both in the main house and here, if you were a visiting dignitary from France, you got a bedroom, the aides got bumped out. If you were a cook for Mrs. Ford and somebody else brought a higher level person in to help them, they got bumped. So you got bumped from a bed to a floor, out to a barn. And as I said, the winter that Washington was here was the most brutal winter in recorded history, at least in the U.S. So it wasn't the most comfortable place to be staying between the high ceilings and the cramped quarters. Washington always had at least 1 servant outside his door in case he needed something at night. There were guards sleeping in the hallways. Again, the British were only 35 miles away, so they were always concerned about either a raid or a kidnapping or something. So the house, even though it's very large, and thank goodness it's got a lot of wasted space, but it probably came in very handy when you had all the guards and all the help, etc. We're now going to go down. Be careful, the stairs are steep, and we'll look at the Martha Stewart kitchen of its day.
It looked like it's I swear.
It was cut by.
Do you need rails? Nope, just my luck.
Just hold on a bit. Just stay to the right.
It's kind of cool because they have the room so you can go into the other room or close the door like you can stay to the top.
What?
Yeah. Like you,
When you were in school,
in order to get from one classroom to the other, you had to go through. You came in, it was like a big box. You came in one classroom, out to the other.
I feel a little
I've
bit
not felt
seasick.
that, but it wouldn't surprise me.
Yeah, I think it does, just a little.
When I moved back to New Jersey, we renovated an old farmhouse, and I would drop something on the floor and have to take it about halfway down.
That's what happens. I think this one takes this way.
Okay, everybody down? So we're now in the bottom of the kitchen wing, and here is the Martha Stewart kitchen of its day. The only thing that's been done to the kitchen is the back of the fireplace. They've added some fire brick because at some point they stopped using wood to burn the fire and they went to coal. Otherwise, the kitchen is as it was, and the pantry to my left is full of pots and pans, things you need to cook with. Washington had 3 cooks with him, and Mrs. Ford had 1. And they were constantly, the cooks, not General Washington, Mrs. Ford, the cooks were constantly chefs. They were probably chefs. The chefs were constantly squabbling about who would cook when, because, you know, Mrs. Ford is having the ladies over from Morristown, and she's having them for dinner, and she wants to eat at 4:30. But the general's here with Lafayette, and he wants to eat at 4:30, and, you know, he's the general. Washington got so fed up with the squabbling between the cooks, chefs, that he directed that a small lean-to hut be built outside of the house, and he had his own kitchen created, but it took 2 months. So Washington didn't have his own private kitchen and cooking area until February. So for the first 8 weeks, 2 months, they were constantly squabbling on who gets to cook when. He got tired of it and said, enough, I'll make my own place to cook my food. So we've got the kitchen, we've got a pantry. To my left is the other 2 main rooms that you would normally come in from the main entrance. One is the dining room, but this is where Mrs. Ford and her daughter stayed when the general was in residence. They moved in a bed, just like we have it now. They also had table and chairs brought in. So Mrs. Ford had a daughter and 3 boys. In the evening, Mrs. Ford and her 4 children would take dinner in what was the dining room, now a bedroom, all-purpose room, and they also had a small sitting area by the fireplace to spend the evening in. But this normally would have been the large, formal dining room. In front of me, and behind the gentleman with the Yankee cap on, are a couple of buckets hanging on the wall.
This is original George Washington.
As long as it's not a Mets cap. Those are fire buckets, and they were typically close to most of the major fireplaces. They were not filled with water, though. Water was a pain to bring up from the well. Water evaporated, water was sloppy. They would be filled with sand, and if you never had to use them, and hopefully you didn't, the sand just stayed there forever. The other room that I'll walk through first was truly described as a family room, which surprised me. I didn't think that concept came about until much later. But it's a small room in the back of the house that the Fords would meet in the evening, talk about what happened during the day, help the kids with their homework, etc. What we'll do is look at these 3 rooms here and that room, and I'll meet you in the main hall again, and we'll talk about what happened to the Fords and when Washington left.
Excuse me, what is that? Is that for coal or something?
Right there?
Yeah.
No, that's actually a stove to roast meat in.
Oh, okay.
By the way, look at the bed in here. If you'll notice, remember I said that Mrs. Ford had 3 sons. The top bed slept 2 boys, and there's a trundle bed that pulls out where the youngest son slept. And then back in the morning, they would slide the bed back under the main bed.
But we still have to walk. Just kind of like, we gotta get it. Okay, we got time.
Huh?
You go, you make a right, and you get on 202, and you come back up about a mile, and then you make a left on Kennedy Way Road, and that goes right to the, there'll be a big sign.
Oh, my.
Okay. You know, that was in southern New England. That's not so much done in the north. Okay, so it's now June 7th, 8th. The winter is about over, and Washington is told that the British have moved out of New York City. They have crossed the river and they're in New Jersey, and they're heading to a place called Connecticut Farm. And everybody thinks Connecticut Farm, Mike, Connecticut is north, not south. No, it's actually a place in New Jersey or in Union, and I've been told that there's actually a school called Connecticut Farm School. Okay. So he gets the word that the British are moving on Connecticut Farm. He calls out his lifeguard. He calls up some troops from Jockey Hollow, and they go up, and there is a battle at Connecticut Farm. It only lasts about a day or a day. I hate to say this, but growing up in the Vietnam era, I mean, what they call battles, I call, 3 shots in the dark and let's go home. But there was a battle at Connecticut Farm. And when Washington left here to go to Connecticut Farm, he took Mrs. Ford's oldest son, Timothy. Timothy was 17, and he wanted to be a soldier. He went with Washington to Connecticut Farm, gets shot in the leg, falls on the ground, and while he is being treated, gets shot again in the leg. So in the space of probably half a day, he's shot twice. Because he's Mrs. Ford's son, and Washington, I assume, got to know him, he's given a little special attention, and he's brought home, and he does recover. Washington only comes back here to basically say goodbye to his wife, pack up some maps, etc., and his stay at the Ford Mansion is over. His wife packs up, leaves by about the middle of June, and Washington's servants pack up all whatever's foodstuffs are left, and they're gone by about the 22nd of June. And that ends Washington's stay at the Ford Mansion. It's interesting that the 3 boys are homeschooled, and that was typical. And they are schooled until it is decided they are smart enough to go to college if that's what they want to do. All 3 boys go to what becomes Princeton. They all go to Princeton University, and they then all go on to get law degrees, or they go into training for the law. While at Princeton, the daughter, Elizabeth, goes to Princeton to visit one of her brothers, and she meets a young man at Princeton, and she ends up marrying him. And he is from South Carolina. So she and her husband move to Charleston. 2 of the sons, Timothy and the youngest son, Jacob III, go to Charleston to visit, and they love South Carolina so much that they end up residing in South Carolina. The house stays in the Ford family because the second son, Gabriel, buys out the 3 other kids. So the house stays with the Fords until 1873, when probably the grandsons of Gabriel basically say, it's too old, it's too drafty. Everybody else is building nice big mansions, and they try to knock it down. They put it up for auction. And that's where we started. Okay? Any questions? And if I don't know the answer, and I certainly don't, the park rangers down at the main building are very helpful and they love to talk about their job. So feel free to ask them.
Is there a basement?
There is. There's a full basement. There are two separate attics, but there's one full basement. And that's where Washington would have stored a lot of his dry goods during the winter, because that little pantry couldn't hold 8 to 10 wagon loads of goods. In fact, they ended up building a permanent barn for those wagons, and when they left, Mrs. Ford got a barn for free.
What would be the purpose of a basement back in the basement of the house?
I think it was just construction. I mean, it was, and storage.
Is there an attic?
There are two attics. They are small. Well, the one over the servants' quarters is small. There is a full attic, and it is, as far as I know, it's just empty. It might hold security up there now, security cameras or whatever. But I'm sorry, I'm going to have to go and start my 3. I'm going to have to shoo you out.